As we begin to discuss the age of exploration, where the Europeans go off and explore the far-off lands and begin to colonize, there's a few key ideas that we have to discuss in order for us to be able to understand what it is that's going on. So we're going to be discussing first what we mean when we say worlds collide. We're going to be taking a quick overview of what was going on in the world as this was beginning to happen. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the idea of man and how the Europeans viewed mankind. So here we go. So by worlds collide, there are two key themes that we're going to pay attention to as we progress through this unit. The first is the idea of cultures making contact for the first time. We are very used to the idea of a international society. Within all of our classes, there are people from all across the world. When you go online, you're interacting with knowledge and people from every corner of the globe. But that was not always the case. And during this time period, we're going to be focusing on what happens as people begin to explore and cultures begin to meet for the first time. The other big key idea is this idea of religion versus science, especially focused in Europe, where you have, like in this picture on the left, the religious leaders who had a very strong power hold trying to maintain that, while on the right you see Galileo, who said things that contradicted the church, but in the name of science was pushing against their authority. So these are the two big themes that we are going to have overriding in this unit. Now let's take a look at what was going on in the world between the 1300s and 1400s in the rest of the world. Now you have East Asia and the Middle East. This area is where the intellectual and military power centers were. The most powerful countries in the world were located in the Middle East and Asia. This was where the brightest people were, the greatest ideas, the most advanced societies were in this area here. Then you have Europe, Africa, Russia, and South America. These areas were a mixture of tribal cultures, but you saw the spring up of religious-based kingdoms. In Europe, you had kingdoms that were founded on Christianity, or they used Christianity as their explanation for their king's power. In Africa, especially Northern Africa, you see the same concept but built around Islam. And then in the South and Central America, you have kingdoms and some empires building up around their sun gods. You have the Inca, you have the Aztec, you have the Mayans that were all existing right around this time. These people had mediocre technology and enough knowledge to be successful at what they were doing, but by no means were they on the cutting edge of society. Now, if I was to rate these groups, I would give Europe a slight edge because they had guns. And that edge will grow as they develop steel. But really, for the most part, at this point in the 13 to 1400s, all these areas that are in green are equal. Then you have North America and Australia. These were tribal cultures. You see in North America what we refer to as the native tribes, the Cherokee, and so on, that you don't see the taking hold of agriculture in either of these two areas. Australia, there's a group called the Aborigines that we'll get introduced to later, but basically a group that had been isolated from the rest of human society since basically 10,000, 40,000, 50,000 BC. Really long time that Australia to the rest of the world, nobody else even knew that they existed. So let's now look at the view of man in Europe. For the better portion of 1,000 years, the Catholic Church was the key central figure in what we refer to in Europe as the Middle Ages. This was the time after the Roman Empire had fallen apart, and you have all of these different kingdoms. Now, to understand this, there was only one church in Europe at that time, and it was the Roman Catholic Church. There had been a division with what we refer to as the Eastern Orthodox that takes foothold in Greece and in Russia. But in what we consider Europe, there is one church. There weren't the 10,000 options like we're used to today. There was one. So let's take a look at their view on man, as in humanity. The church preached that this life that we're existing right now was meant to be miserable. That you're born, you did your work, you kind of suffered through it because mankind is sinful, and this life is just meant to be miserable. Now, the afterlife, heaven is going to be awesome. So suffer through this life and just wait for awesomeness once you die. And centered to this idea is that man is wretched, man is sinful, and man is capable of doing nothing good. So you're born, you live, your goal was to find Jesus, to get yourself straight with him, and then you die, and then if you played your cards right when you were alive, heaven, awesome, and you'll exist for eternity in paradise. If you don't, then you have what we refer to as not paradise, basically eternal suffering, that if you think this life is miserable, just wait till an afterlife where it gets even worse. Now, the church had all of the power because the church controlled the keys to afterlife. Basically, obey the church and go to heaven. Disobey and you go to not heaven. So it didn't matter how much military power you had. If you disobeyed the church, you could get excommunicated, basically kicked out, and basically you wrote yourself a one-way ticket to not heaven. And this allowed for the Pope to carry a great deal of power in terms of the politics of what happened in Europe. You did not want to disobey the Pope. You did not want to disobey other church leaders because they could control your afterlife. The church was thus also considered the source of knowledge. When the Roman Empire had fallen apart, most of its great knowledge left with it, and most of the intellectuals had moved to Constantinople. So the church was the last remnants of the great Roman Empire and had established itself as the source of knowledge. And remembering where questioning gets you, you didn't want to question the church. If the church said something was right, it was right. Because if you questioned, you were putting your afterlife in jeopardy. Now, to understand knowledge, you also had to understand books. Books were written by hand in the monasteries. Monasteries were places where the monks and the nuns lived, devoting their lives to the study of the Bible and of God's Word, and to prayer and purifying your life. A lot of these monks were also scribes, where they would spend their days recopying either books of the Bible or the great works of those days. A really, really good scribe could knock out about 40 pages of writing a day. This made knowledge both expensive and hard to come by, especially when you start lacing some of those pages with gold and other ornate things, because you're playing to a rich crowd, so you want to make sure that it looks nice. But you couldn't just go to a library and pick up a book. If you wanted a book made, It was a very long, expensive process, so new ideas did not travel very far very easily. Now, to flip this, in the Renaissance, you have this outgrowth of this idea called humanism. And the Renaissance will be this period from the 1400s to the 1700s. Renaissance means rebirth, and in particular, rebirth of ancient Greek and ancient Roman cultures. This particularly shows up in art, literature, poetry, architecture, and other things of that nature. We will delve into this topic more later, but this picture exemplifies a number of the things that we're talking about. You see grandiose architecture. You see a celebration of knowledge and humanity. This picture portrays most of the great minds from the Greek and Roman times, and the great philosophers and the intellectuals whose ideas re-spark learning and knowledge and all those things within Europe. We'll unpack this more as we go through this unit. Now, central to the Renaissance is this idea of humanism. Now, the church had said during the Middle Ages, man is miserable and is wretched and can do nothing good apart from God. Humanism flips that and says, man is great and can do great things. It can write great literature, it can build great buildings, it can make great weapons. Man is great, man is awesome, man is capable of really, really great stuff. And that this life that we are living is meant to be enjoyed. It is meant to be awesome. So there's no need to wait for an afterlife. I mean, yes, you want your afterlife to be good as well, but there's no need to spend your life miserably plowing through just trying to get to the other side. This life is meant to be enjoyed now. So you start to have this tension between the church and between this offshoot of intellectuals that are saying something that is quite different. Now, also during the Renaissance, you have a new way for knowledge to spread called the Gutenberg Press, invented in 1447. This was developed by Johannes Gutenberg, and he was a metal worker that basically fashioned something called movable type. This idea had already taken place sort of in China, but we see it for the first time in Europe, that you arrange your letters, you put ink on it, and then you put your page down, and you see in this page there's a lever, you press the lever, and you now have a full page of type. A printing press could put out 3,600 pages a day. So no longer did you have to wait years for your book to come out. You're waiting for your first copy, maybe a couple days, couple weeks. You could have hundreds, if not thousands, of copies within a month. So knowledge became cheaper and spread more quickly to more people. More people learned how to read, more people gained essential knowledge and allowed new ideas to travel faster to more people. So knowledge was no longer just for the rich and elite. It started to open up to more people. This coincided quite nicely with the scientific revolution. This is when people started to use the human mind to make discoveries about the world. During the Middle Ages, it was whatever the church said. And the church used a combination of ancient classics, such as Aristotle and Confucius, and in combination with the Bible to say, this is how things are and you're not to question me. The scientific revolution was all about questioning. Let's question, let's probe, let's use what they now refer to as the scientific method of let's develop a hypothesis, an idea, and let's go see if it's right. That knowledge can be gained and proven by using the human mind. And you see during this time period great gains in astronomy, physics, and physiology, the study of the body. And thanks to the Gutenberg press, these ideas spread quickly. So, as we talk about worlds colliding, we will see, thanks to the scientific revolution, thanks to the Gutenberg press, this idea that man is great, can do great things, and they take this greatness and this new outpouring of knowledge and begin to go exploring for financial purposes, but they begin to go exploring, and cultures begin to interact, and these cultural worlds begin to collide. And we also see the beginnings of this tension between the religious world and this humanist scientist world, and this tension that is beginning.